So thank you, Liz, for joining me. And just to
Yeah,
tell people a little bit about who you are and what your role is there on Isle Royale.
sure. My name is Liz Valencia, and I've worked at Isle Royale for 30 years now, and I've been involved in a lot of different planning efforts, actually. My current job is I'm in the program manager for interpretation, education, and cultural resources. And so definitely directly related to the planning, since it deals with visitor use, deals with cultural resources preservation. So yeah, it's something that we've been working on for quite a few years, actually.
Okay, great. So the Wilderness Stewardship Plan is kind of what we're talking about today. And so it's been in the works for how long then?
So we started working on it minimally right after our general management plan was done in the late 1990s. We
Oh,
did a bunch of visitor surveys, yeah, and we worked on developing a plan, and then we were just bringing it out, and then some of the wilderness guidance changed, and so we had to redo the plan, and then it lagged for a bit as we started doing a cultural resources plan combined with it. So and then it just got held up for a bit. Just based on policy decisions at the Washington office. There was nothing we could do. So finally, we brought it back, and now we're finishing it up. So we're anxious to be wrapping this process up now.
okay. So there was no Wilderness Stewardship Plan before. There is none right now.
That's correct. There's
Oh,
not one. It's something that every park is supposed to have. If a park has designated wilderness, they're obligated to have a plan in place that says how they're going to manage it. And so we need to do that. I mean, it makes sense to do it too. If you're managing wilderness, you should have a plan so the public knows how you're going about it.
yeah. And you're 99% wilderness?
Yeah, the land part of the park is. So a lot of people probably don't know, but the boundary of Isle Royale actually includes a lot of Lake Superior water. It's almost 3/4 of the park actually is water. Only about a quarter of the park is actual land base, and of the land, 99% is designated wilderness or potential wilderness addition. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The plan is 146 pages, the document. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's long. I haven't read it all. It's a lot to unpack. I read part of it like a month ago, and then last night after we scheduled this interview, I was running through it again. But I mean, what's most important for people who visit Isle Royale and who have hiked there and plan to visit in the future? More, you're opening it for public comment right now, and that ends on September 26th. But I mean, what are you really wanting people to comment on, and what like aspects of this plan?
Yeah, those plans can be really long and they include a lot of standard language. So basically a plan lays out alternatives on how you're going to move forward in the future. And then like half of the plan is actually assessing the impacts of those actions to the various resources in the park. And the resources are in this park could be visitor use, it's cultural resources. It's another big aspect is wilderness character. And so there's certain guidance on how the wilderness should be treated, and that's part of wilderness character. So yeah, the probably the part that's easiest for people to focus on, the first sections, the first couple chapters, where it lays out the alternatives. And there's three alternatives that are all defined, and it's all in chapter 2. If people want to go right right to the part. So every plan has what's called a no action alternative. And that's basically continuing managing the park the way you're managing it now. And so that's alternative A. And what that means for visitors like on the ground would same that a few things that are the same as we have now. So if you come to Isle Royale now and you're going to do a backpacking trip, you get your ferry reservation or you get your seaplane reservation, or you come in your own private boat and you show up at the visitor center or on the Ranger 3 and you get a backcountry camping permit when you arrive if you're camping. And then you go off into the park and you do your trip. And if you get to a certain campground and you have blisters or it's pouring down rain and you decide you want to stay at that campground for an extra night, you can do that. There's not a reservation system. There's no fixed itinerary. You can change your plan at any time. And so that's alternative A. That would continue into the future. Another thing that's all in alternative A is the size of parties. So right now, if you have between 1 and 6 people that you're camping with, you're considered an individual party. And then groups at Isle Royale are considered from 7 to 10 people. And so we get a lot of church groups, Boy Scout groups, and they come in groups up to 10 people. And so that would all remain the same. All those group sizes would all be the same in alternative A. Another thing that would be the same as we see now in alternative A is there's no group size limits for day use anywhere. So you could be on a backpacking trip and you could be, hiking down a greenstone. Maybe you run into a group of 35 people that, there's no limit on the number of people that can be in a group in the wilderness at the time. So those are kind of 3 of the like experience things that are in alternative A. A few of the differences then that are provided in the 2 action alternatives. So there's an alternative B, which is currently identified as the preferred action forward. And then there's also an alternative C. And most of the differences across the alternatives really deal with kind of 2 separate things. They deal with visitor use and numbers and controlling that. And then they also deal with the visitor experience. So alternative B has some different different ideas to deal with overcrowding and then also provide for a little bit more solitude in the wilderness. Whereas alternative C is very much focused on visitor experience and very much focused on solitude and improving that wilderness quality. So I'll just cover a few of the differences in alternative B first. So as opposed to A, like I said, now when you show up, you just get your permit. When you get on the island, you do your trip, you're good to go. In alternative B is proposed that people would need to get the permits before they go to the park. So this would be a backcountry office. It would be an advance permit. People would need to call or email like in the winter time and get their permit. So they would have to have that permit in hand before they go to the island. And once they got to the island, though, they could still change their itinerary. They could still stay at a campground an extra night if they needed to for whatever reason or just wanted to. Thought Daisy Farm was beautiful and they wanted to stay there 2 more nights. Great, they could do that. But they would need to have gotten the permit in advance. And at the time, the way we do it now is we just issue as many permits for campgrounds that people want. So for example, Lane Cove is a really popular campsite. If 12 parties want to get a backcountry camping permit to camp at Lane Cove for a night, we will issue 12 permits for that site. But there's only 6 sites there. So some campgrounds like that get overcrowded. People show up there, it's a dead end trail, and then the campground's full, so they end up having to share. And so to get at that, some of that overcrowding that's happening, we wouldn't issue over the number of sites permits for more more nights than people can be there. So for example, Lane Cove, there's 6 sites. We wouldn't issue 12 permits. We'd only issue 6. or we would issue a certain percentage of that based on the number of sites that are available across the whole island. So the plan right now calls for we would issue 85% capacity. That leaves like 15% for people to still change their itinerary when they get out there. So I'll pause just a minute there. Did you have any questions or anything you want to follow up on?
Yeah, so with alternative B, so you said like say the example Lane Cove, but I mean you're not asking people where they're going, you're just issuing like a permit for the island, not for particular campgrounds or campsites. So I mean everyone could like end up still like at Daisy Farm or Lane Cove at one time.
Yeah, we do have people give us their planned itinerary. So they list each night and where they plan to stay. And that would continue. So that's their initial plan. And we're able to do some statistics and see really based on that where the overcrowding is occurring, at least in what people plan to do.
Okay.
So yeah, people would still need to get they'd give us a night by night itinerary.
Okay.
But once they got to the island in alternative B, they could still change their itinerary if they wanted to.
Okay. And so when
Yeah.
people get that permit, you'll issue like a certain amount of permits for per day, or I mean, I guess it's based on, because some people are there for 2 days, some people are there for 10
Yep.
days.
Yep. Yeah, we haven't worked out the specifics
Mhm.
how it would work, but people would get they would get their permit for the number of nights that they're going to camp. So if they're going to camp for 4 nights, they would get a backcountry camping permit that has their itinerary, their planned itinerary for those 4 nights.
Okay.
And of course, since this is camping, it doesn't apply to anyone who would be coming just for the day because they're not camping, or people who are staying at the lodge because they're not camping either. So that's a whole different thing. So this is just people who are camping, and the system would include campgrounds that aren't in the wilderness as well.
Okay.
Because there's campgrounds in wilderness, there's campgrounds that aren't in wilderness, and we thought it would make sense to cover all campgrounds together in a new permitting program.
And is this coming about? I mean, are you seeing overcrowding now and a problem with too many people on the island at one time?
We are definitely seeing an overcrowding issue in some of the campgrounds that are very popular. Lane Cove, I mentioned, is one. West Chicken Bone Campground is another one. We see it at Rock Harbor Campground. That's the entry point in the northeast end of the island. So on nights, for example, when the Ranger 3 comes in and the Queen has come in, there could be many more people at that campground than there are sites. So we have to just kind of squeeze people in. It happens a lot more now than it used to, and it's been something that visitors have mentioned to us, and something that we've noticed that's been happening more and more in the last 5 years. I mean, not during COVID, of course, we won't consider that year as part of the stats, but it is getting to be a problem, and we're concerned about it because Isle Royale, in a number of the campgrounds, it's a wilderness campground, and showing up at a campground where every single site is full and you have to, figure out where you're going to camp. That's not the visitor experience that we want to provide for people in wilderness, and it's not really what people expect at a wilderness park.
Mm-hmm. When I visited, I went at the end of May, and there wasn't, I mean, we are like on the first boat to get over there.
Yep.
So I didn't experience that at all. I mean, there was nobody there at these campgrounds that we were at. I mean, maybe only one or two
Yep.
other people and stuff. So, I mean, it was really
Yeah.
pleasant. And I was wondering,
Yeah. It's
what it's like when it's, peak visitor season. I was like, would it be the same experience? I was like, I doubt it would be.
Yeah, it's definitely different based on when you go. And
Mhm.
May still tends to be pretty cold and rainy. And
Mhm.
so a lot of people don't come in May, and they just can't work it out to come in May. And then late in September also gets is similar. And that's, ferries don't run as often. It's harder to get out there. So yeah, it definitely, the overcrowding that we're seeing is definitely happening more in the July, August time period. Early September is still pretty busy.
Now, would this change the fees at all? I mean, what is like, the fee now, or how does that work? I mean,
Yeah, so there's no separate fee for camping. The only camping type fee that we have right now is for groups. And I mentioned right now a group is from 7 to 10 people in the party. So those people they have to get reservations in advance. It's something groups already do. And there's a fee for that. There's not a fee specifically for a backcountry office. There would potentially be a separate camping fee in the future if we used a system like recreation.gov. There could be an associated fee with that, but right now we don't plan on changing any of the fees. The entrance fee for Isle Royale right now is $7 per person per day, and it's we honor all of the various park passes. And so with the Isle Royale specific pass, a lot of people buy that because if you're there for a week or more, or if you're planning on coming back, it's cheaper than paying the $7 a day. And the nice thing about the passes too is it does cover up to 4 people traveling with you. Yeah. So yeah, we don't propose right now in the plan any new extensive camping fees.
okay. And so alternative C, which seems a bit drastic from A and B.
Yeah, so one other thing I'll mention about alternative B just before we move on to C, another change that would help provide a little bit more opportunity, we think, for some people is changing the individual party size and the group size and boosting each one up by 2. So in alternative B, an individual size party would be from 1 to 8 instead of from 1 to 6. And groups then would be from 9 to 12 instead of 7 to 10. So each could have two more people in them, and we really feel like that could help spread out use a little bit more, make groups could be just a couple people larger. And it also the campsites and campgrounds are, we think, large enough to accommodate just 2 more people in those sites. So that's the other thing about B. So yeah, alternative C, as I mentioned, is a focus on solitude. And so one thing that wouldn't change in alternative C is we wouldn't change the individual party size or the group size. That would remain the same. And then one of the biggest changes proposed in alternative C is it does propose a night-by-night reservation system. So people would get a reservation before they go in advance. They would get their reservation for, if they're camping for 4 nights, they would get a reservation for a campsite for each night. They would have to stick to that itinerary. They could expect that when they showed up at the campground, there would be a site for them because it's strictly controlled by reservation. They wouldn't be able to change, but they would know that they had a site. So there are some trade-offs there, right? There's, you have a site, but you are required to stay on your itinerary. So that's probably really the biggest change proposed in alternative C, is that night-by-night reservation. They'd still have to get the camping permits in advance, and they would just not be able to change their itinerary when they got to the island. So we would just book 100%, and each campground could potentially then be full every single night if it spreads use out across the summer. I mean, we don't really know how that would work, but that could be something that could happen. Then another difference with alternative C between C and B is that right now we do have commercial groups, and we have camps that send campers to Isle Royale, and they're considered commercial groups because people pay to do it. They have leaders that are paid. So none of those commercial groups would be able to use wilderness campsites. That's another big change in alternative C. And that's it's solitude again. That's the focus in alternative C. And then one thing that's been really interesting discussion that we've had some differences with B and C is the winter closure of the park. And there's some differences across the alternatives in that. So right now, most people know the island part of the park is closed in the wintertime. We close in the beginning of November. We open in the middle of April. And then the island is closed all winter long. People can't go. So alternative C proposes to have the park open in the wintertime. No winter closure. It would definitely be a challenging wilderness experience because we don't propose any services on the island. We don't propose any transportation system to get people out there. But that's one big change in alternative C that we've had a lot of interesting discussions about. People seem to be intrigued about it and then really wonder how that would work. Alternative B then, looking down the road at potential changes in Lake Superior over time if the lake heats up. Alternative B does call for continuing the closure in the winter right now, but we would reevaluate it if Lake Superior does become ice-free in the wintertime for 100% ice-free for 5 years in a row. So if there's no ice on Lake Superior in the future, 100% of the wintertime, and people could then conceivably get to the park in their boats, then potentially we would relook at the winter closure. So that's another difference across the alternatives that people have been quite interested in.
That is interesting. I mean, it just seems to be other than, if Lake Superior wasn't frozen, it'd be a very difficult place to access in the winter.
It would be. Yeah, it definitely would be. It would. And Isle Royale is a wilderness park. So we thought it would be important to add that as a discussion topic, as an alternative going forward, that idea of it's a wilderness, it should be open for real wilderness experience in the wintertime. So that, we really wanted to add that into this wilderness plan as one of the options to get public comment on.
No, I mean, I guess, I follow some Facebook groups and stuff, and I think people, a lot of people have voiced their opinions there. They like the flexibility, they like A, leaving it unchanged, or they like the flexibility still in alternative B, which is, the preferred alternative, as you said. And then that C, doesn't really, obviously you don't have that flexibility. Just thinking back to like I hike Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. And I mean, a lot of places you book your site and
Yeah.
that's your
Yep.
site. You have to be at that campground. But when you go on like to the recreation.gov to book your sites with, these days that you have off, and you're like, I need to leave this day, but I can only hike, like 5 or 6 miles. So that puts me here, but then I'm going to have to hike like 15 miles to get to the next open campsite. And then the next day I'm only have to hike 3 miles to get to the next site that's open.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's limiting. Whereas, what people have been used to with Isle Royale, just that flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've seen quite a few of those comments too. That's really the biggest difference between, A, B, and C is how we're going to deal with visitor overnight use in the backcountry and camping. That's been an ongoing issue that we've talked about, and we've tried to hone in on how we can address that. So we're really hoping that these three ideas will get people's comments on them, and see what everyone prefers. I have definitely heard a lot of people commenting on the fact that they like being able to change their itinerary for whatever reason, even if the boats are late, rain, whatever it is, that flexibility does really seem to be important to people in some of the comments that I've read. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like you said, the flexibility, because sometimes the boats, you're dealing with Lake Superior, you're dealing with,
Yeah.
Mother Nature here, and you might be a day late. You might not get there on that
Yep.
date.
Yeah, especially, well, yeah, that's happening. That's been happening here in the last few weeks. We've had the Isle Royale Queen, postpone a trip or do a round trip and then another round trip in a day. So there's been a lot of that. It's such a common thing in the fall, for sure, that it would be hard. It would be hard to accommodate that with a night by night reservation system. We'd certainly have to put a lot of thought into how we would deal with those kinds of delays that are not in any way related to the people, that they don't control the boat schedule. So that would really take some work to figure out how to deal with the delays. Mm-hmm. And the seaplane, the same thing. The seaplane could be delayed or canceled because of weather, because of fog. That's more of a springtime thing, but that's another issue that would be really take some thought with a night by night reservation system, how that would work. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Lots to think about. Lots of
yeah. There is a lot to think about. And I really encourage people, if they don't feel like they can just, read through the entire plan, I really suggest, reading through some of the introductory stuff and then really looking at the alternatives and some of the differences in the alternatives. I mean, there's another thing that I'll mention, just that people might find intriguing, that Alternative B does call for a couple of new water accessible campsites. So people might be interested in reading about that. They're all really, chapter 2 is really the meat of the changes and talks about, some of the alternatives and proposals going forward. And then for people who are really, really interested in the impacts on the resources, which is important because it is a wilderness park, and we need to be conscious of our actions. So people are interested in that, to look at kind of the existing conditions is laid out in chapter 3, and then chapter 4 is the impacts of the alternatives on all the resources in the park.
And then also back and see, kind of talking a little bit about structures, the park would remove the shelters in Alternative C.
In Alternative C, yeah, in the wilderness campgrounds, and there would be, and I think it's about 20, the number is. So a lot of the shelters are actually in campgrounds, lakeshore campgrounds, that are not in wilderness. So, for example, just to give people an example, if they're familiar with the island, Mosky Basin, Daisy Farm, 3 Mile, Rock Harbor, those are non-wilderness campgrounds. So those shelters would be there. Malone Bay, another example. Chippewa Harbor, for example, though, is wilderness. So for an example of a wilderness campground, those shelters would be removed in Alternative C. And then they would be replaced with campsites or camping pads of some sort. Yep. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's another big change in C. Yep.
Yeah, and it's good to point out that, I guess when I think shelters, I do think of Daisy Farm. I do think of,
Yep,
3 Mile and Windigo and stuff. So, but yeah, as you mentioned, those aren't wilderness areas. So
they're
those
not.
shelters
Yeah.
they'll be there for people still.
Yeah, the big campgrounds, most the really big campgrounds are not wilderness.
Right.
They would still be included if we do any, of the reservation system or advance permitting, that would still include those campgrounds. But yeah, you're right. The shelter removal is only proposed for the wilderness campgrounds
Okay.
in alternative C only. Yeah.
And then we can touch on just kind of, I mean, briefly, because it would take a long time to go through it. So it's not just the hiking and the permitting and stuff that's in this wilderness stewardship plan, but there's also a lot of structures and buildings
Mhm.
within the park that I had to Google the word moldering. I
Oh,
had a
yeah.
feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the park has different plans for different structures throughout the islands there.
Mhm. Yeah, we really have an interesting, I would call it an interesting collection of historic buildings that are in wilderness. And actually, most of them are in what's considered potential wilderness additions. But for example, of some that are in actual wilderness were the three fire towers.
Mm.
The fire towers are built in the early 60s. We hadn't evaluated them, but when the plan started, we wondered, are they significant? Are they important? Are they like every other fire tower everywhere else? So we did evaluate them to see if they were eligible to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And that's a listing of all the buildings in the country that are considered to be historically significant. They have to be 50 years old or older, and the fire towers totally fit into that. So we did an evaluation and we found out, yes, they are significant, more than we realized, and they are now listed on the National Register. When they started looking into it, they didn't find that there were lots and lots of fire towers left. So, so that was interesting. So those are now on the National Register. So we do need to consider, plans forward for those. Those are made out of steel, so no matter what we would propose for those, they're going to last for quite a long time because of the way they're made. But some of the other ones, a lot of the others are just little cabins. They're made of, wood. Some of them are even made of driftwood and things that, and repaired over time. So there's a number of those cabins, and a lot of those are in Tobin Harbor, which is right next to Rock Harbor. There's also a few on the North Shore. And so, and then some were used for recreation. They're, summer cabins, basically. Others were used for fishermen, and they used those as a fishing base. They went out and set nets and caught fish commercially in Lake Superior for years and years. And so yeah, there's a collection of both of those in various places in the park, and a number of those are in wilderness, and some are in great shape still, some are not in great shape. So the way that we've been doing the planning and just making decisions about what to keep has been pretty opportunistic. Like, we might have a group who wants to take care of one, and they've offered, and families have offered to keep up the homes that their families lived in. But there hasn't been an overall plan of, which ones we're going to focus preservation on, which ones are the most important, which ones we're going to potentially let go, and which ones we may remove for other purposes. A good example of that, there's a cabin on Johns Island that's in Washington Harbor, and we propose in alternative B to build a campground there. That would be one of the new boat water accessible campsites. So that's proposed to be removed. Most of the rest of them that are proposed for removal are already in pretty bad shape, like they're falling down. And then there's another kind of set of buildings that are in fair to poor shape. And those, at some sites, we propose to let those molder. You said you needed to look up what moldering is. Moldering is basically, you just let them sit there and they just naturally fall apart over time. It's deterioration over time, but we wouldn't like hasten the process or anything. They would just gradually molder. The thing about moldering is people would still be able to tell that there was something there. Like they would be able to tell there was a site. And so that's an important part of the landscape. Still, these places would still be visible for a number of years. You'd still be able to tell that, there were people here. There were people here doing things,
Tell the
fishing or
history.
recreating here. Yeah. And then the other two categories are probably much more understandable to people. Preservation. So some we say we're gonna spend the money and time and work on these, the effort involved to preserve these going into the future, keeping the historical integrity and maintaining them for, as we go forward. The others proposed for stabilization are basically that's kind of doing the minimal work that's needed to keep a building standing. So it's a focus on roofs and making sure they're weather tight, but not going in and doing the full like rehab kind of preservation work that might be needed to make it so people could tour inside of it or something like that. So yeah, there's not a lot of differences across the alternatives in the what's proposed for those 4 different treatments, but there are a few differences people could read about.
Yeah. Well, alternative A on the no action, obviously there's no action. I mean, you're not going to remove
Yeah.
or
Right. We would just continue making the decisions like we're making them now. Some would be maintained, some wouldn't, based on what's available, who's available to do it. Yep.
okay. Now, so I mean, there's alternative A, B, and C. Now, after the public comment and you go back through, I mean, would you do like a variation between A and B or B and C, or is it just hardlined? It's either A, B, or C.
No, and a lot of times plans end up as a combination.
Okay.
So yeah, that's great. I'm glad you went to next steps. So next steps is we get all of the comments in. We've also had some meetings with tribes. We have discussions with consulting parties, and those are a group of organizations that we have that are interested in the historic properties. So we've been consulting with them about the specific impacts the alternatives are having proposed on various historic resources. So we take all that together, we review all that, and then we just decide, is it going to be A? Is it going to be B? Is it going to be C? Is it going to be parts of A, parts of B, parts of C? And then it all, and then the final plan gets put together. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of decisions after all the public comments come in. That takes months to really sort through everything and make those decisions. So yeah, a lot of plans end up as bits and pieces of alternatives, and sometimes then it ends up being like a new alternative D or something. But yep,
that's what I was wondering. I was like,
yeah,
and then so it takes months, afterwards.
yeah.
When are you planning to have the plan done and then implemented? So
Yeah, so the all of that sorting, decision making, all of that takes place through the winter. We hope to have the final plan out. In fact, I can look at the timeline, it's on the newsletter. We through the course of the winter, and we hope to have a final released in late winter, so early in 2024. We'll have a final plan in place for people to read, and then we have to wait to get approval to move forward. That we're thinking could happen in the spring of 2024. And then as far as implementation goes, at that point it would be too late to implement really any changes for 24 if we're already at the spring. So I don't think people would see any changes implemented until 25 at the earliest. After that, just based on the timeline. Yeah.
All right, so people are right now making their plans for next year, since this season's pretty much coming to a wrap. They're like,
yeah. I think the biggest thing that we could potentially move forward with in 2024, because we've already started working on this, we do talk about using partners and partnerships to help with the preservation plans, for example, for historic properties. We also propose that in our cultural resources plan that we finished last year. And so we're already talking to groups, preservation groups, and talking about partnerships. So it is possible that we might have some of those partnerships in place, historic preservation partnerships in 24. That's something that we'll be working on, because we're working on that right now. So we could be moving forward with some of the plans for preservation for the historic buildings in 24 throughout the course of the summer. But any of like the visitor use stuff is very likely people wouldn't see any changes until 25. Yeah.
Good to know. Anything else you'd like the public to know at this point?
It's really important to get public comment, especially from people who visit the park a lot. It's nice to know, their experience, all the things that they've seen on the island, and the way that they'd like to move forward is really important. But I even encourage people who have only visited one time, or maybe are even just thinking about going to Isle Royale, to think about what they would like to experience on the island. And so I would encourage anybody who's interested in Isle Royale, whether they've been there 30 times or they've been there once, or they're thinking about going next year, to get involved, read through the plan, and think about Isle Royale, and how they would like to experience the park, and provide comments. And like I said, since a lot of times plans will end up with bits and pieces of alternatives, if people have, specific things they're interested in, like maybe they're really only interested in whether there's a reservation system or not, then that's fine. Just comment on that part. So yeah, there's, or maybe they're, interested in boating opportunities, and they're interested in that, maybe shelters being removed in alternative C. So anybody's perspective is important, and we really value all the input we can get.
Have you had a lot of comments come through then so far?
We have, yeah, we have. And I've been reading comments, like you mentioned, on Facebook, and I'm really happy that people will get on there and say, your comments don't count unless you enter them in the planning site. So that's really important too. People do have to officially enter those on the park planning website. And I'm hoping maybe you could, put up the link or something, so
I'll
people
put
can
up
find it.
I was a little late kind of
perfect.
doing this story, but people procrastinate anyway, so it's just like a good
Yeah.
reminder at the end here.
Oh yeah, comments come in. Most all the comments come in the last week anyway. So yeah, it takes people time to, delve into it and think about things, and yeah.
And just one more quick question. I mean, so you're going to make this plan. How often would you update this plan then going forward?
It's really interesting. It's hard to say how long plans last.
Mhm.
And it really depends on how things change in the future. But generally, you look at plans lasting, 10 years or potentially more. But sometimes if things really change, parks will plan more frequently. But we, since we've been working on this plan for so many years, I don't see us doing another one. And so I would expect that whatever we put in place will be, lasting for 10 years at least. But one thing we do in talking about, like, an alternative B, that idea of advanced permits, and like what percentage we would issue, because monitoring goes along with that there could be changes within that number, some, little changes like that, how that works without doing a new plan.
Right.
It would just be, changes over time based on monitoring. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we're approaching 40 minutes, and Zoom's going to kick me off of here. So
yeah.
So when you come back to the mainland?
Oh, I'm coming in at the end of the month. Quite a few of my staff are all done at the end of September. So yeah, we'll be coming in at the end of September. And some staff have already gone. They need to go back to college or go off to a job. So yeah, we're starting kind of in the close down time right now. But yeah, but it's still a really beautiful time out here. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to, to cover this for us. And it is important. Sometimes I feel like the Upper Peninsula visitors don't always get the coverage that they need on these kinds of things. We'll have people in Chicago or Minneapolis, that are really involved. And then, but it's really important for people, right there